In this episode, we focus on what happens after the urgent work has cooled down, when the incident is no longer actively spreading and systems are back to stable operation, but the organization still has one more job to do. That job is closing the loop, which means turning the experience of the incident into lasting improvement rather than treating it as a bad day you want to forget. New learners sometimes assume lessons learned is just a meeting where people recap what happened, but the real purpose is deeper. The purpose is to strengthen every phase of incident response, IR, from preparation to detection, analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery, using evidence from what actually occurred. If you skip this work, the same weaknesses remain, and the organization is likely to repeat the incident or repeat the same mistakes under pressure. Closing the loop is how you convert real pain into real resilience, and it is how you make sure the next incident is handled with more speed, less confusion, and better outcomes. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A strong lessons learned process starts with the right mindset, because the wrong mindset turns it into blame, defensiveness, and silence. The mindset you want is that the incident revealed how your system truly behaves, not how you hoped it behaved. That includes technical systems, like logging and access control, but also human systems, like communication patterns, decision-making, and escalation habits. If people feel the goal is to find someone to punish, they will hide details, soften timelines, and avoid admitting uncertainty, which destroys the quality of what you learn. If people feel the goal is improvement, they are more likely to share what they saw, what they struggled with, and what surprised them. A beginner-friendly way to frame this is to focus on conditions rather than individual flaws, such as unclear ownership, missing visibility, or unrealistic assumptions about how fast work can be done. That approach still allows accountability, but it keeps the conversation anchored in fixing systems and processes that affect everyone. When the mindset is right, lessons learned becomes a source of clarity rather than a source of conflict. To strengthen every IR phase, you need to collect the right inputs, and the best inputs come from evidence and timelines rather than from memory alone. Memory is useful, but it is unreliable under stress, so the most valuable lessons come from what was recorded during the incident. The incident timeline, investigation notes, communication records, and key decision points are all important, because they show not only what happened, but how the team understood what happened at each step. That second part matters because decisions are made based on what is believed at the time, not based on what is proven later. If you want to improve response, you have to understand where uncertainty existed, where assumptions formed, and where evidence was missing. You also want to identify the moments where the team lost time, such as waiting for access, waiting for approvals, or searching for the right owner. Those moments point directly to improvements in preparation and process. When lessons learned is evidence-driven, it produces concrete changes instead of vague advice. A practical way to organize lessons learned is to connect each lesson to an IR phase and to a specific failure or friction point that was observed. For example, if detection was delayed because logs were incomplete, that is a lesson tied to preparation and detection. If analysis took too long because ownership was unclear or data was scattered, that is a lesson tied to analysis and coordination. If containment caused unnecessary outage because dependencies were not understood, that is a lesson tied to containment planning and communication. If recovery was messy because rebuild steps were not documented, that is a lesson tied to recovery readiness. By mapping lessons to phases, you avoid a common trap where everything becomes one big list of random improvements that no one prioritizes. You also make it easier to assign actions, because each phase has owners and practices that can be improved. This phase-based mapping is not about formalism, because it is about ensuring that learning turns into operational change. The point is that the incident becomes a diagnostic test for your response capability, and each phase shows specific strengths and weaknesses. Preparation improvements often provide the highest long-term return because preparation determines how quickly you can respond when the next incident begins. Lessons learned commonly reveal gaps, such as missing contact lists, unclear escalation paths, or insufficient access for responders. They may reveal that certain logs were not retained long enough, that critical systems did not have adequate monitoring, or that response tools and documentation were not easy to find under pressure. They may also reveal that the team did not have a shared understanding of what constitutes an incident versus a routine issue, which creates delay at the very beginning. Improving preparation can include tightening policies around logging, clarifying who owns which systems, and ensuring responders can access the information they need quickly. It can also include practicing communication patterns so the team knows how to coordinate without confusion. The important idea is that preparation is not a separate academic activity, because it is what determines whether your next response starts strong or starts in chaos. Lessons learned gives you the real-world evidence to justify investing in those preparation upgrades. Detection and analysis lessons learned often focus on visibility and on the speed at which the team can move from a signal to a defensible understanding. One common lesson is that alerts were too noisy, which caused real signals to be buried among false positives. Another is that the team lacked context, such as baselines for normal behavior, so they could not quickly tell what was unusual. Another is that telemetry did not cover key assets, which forced the team to infer what happened rather than observe it. Lessons might also highlight that the team struggled to build a timeline because timestamps were inconsistent or key event sources were missing. Improving detection and analysis can mean tuning what is monitored, improving time synchronization practices, or creating better methods for quickly scoping incidents using high-value evidence. It can also mean improving the investigation record habits so reasoning is captured as the incident unfolds. When these improvements are made, the next incident moves from confusion to clarity faster, and decisions become more accurate earlier. Containment lessons learned often reveal whether the organization can act proportionally and coordinate actions without self-inflicted harm. Some incidents show that containment was too slow because approvals were unclear or because responders lacked authority to act quickly. Other incidents show that containment was too aggressive, causing outages that were not necessary given the actual risk. Lessons also frequently reveal that dependencies were not understood, so a containment action broke an unexpected business workflow. This is where you learn whether your risk decisions were aligned with business priorities and whether stakeholders understood what was being done and why. Improvements may include defining who can authorize certain actions, documenting dependencies for critical services, and creating guidance for containment options that are reversible and targeted. You may also improve how containment actions are validated, so you can tell whether risk truly decreased after each change. When containment is improved, the next incident becomes more controlled because the organization can apply pressure to the attacker without panicking the business. Eradication and recovery lessons learned often expose whether the organization can restore trust in systems, not just restore functionality. A common lesson is that eradication lacked verification, so teams assumed the attacker was gone when the only evidence was silence. Another lesson is that recovery was rushed, reintroducing systems before monitoring and controls were ready, which increases the chance of recurrence. Lessons may also reveal that rebuild processes were not standardized, leading to inconsistent results and extended downtime. Another frequent issue is that credentials, permissions, and access paths were not fully reviewed, so the conditions that enabled the incident persisted. Improvements may include defining re-entry criteria, strengthening verification steps, and ensuring recovery includes security validation, not only service availability. It may also include creating better documentation and rehearsals for rebuilding critical systems. When eradication and recovery are strengthened, the organization becomes less likely to suffer repeat compromise and less likely to turn an incident into a prolonged operational crisis. Communication is a cross-cutting area that often produces the most actionable lessons, because even technically strong teams can fail if they cannot coordinate and explain decisions. Lessons learned may show that people did not know who to notify, that updates were too frequent or too rare, or that the content of updates was unclear and caused confusion. It may show that technical teams used language that business leaders could not translate into decisions, leading to delays and mistrust. It may also show that responders were overwhelmed by side conversations, repeated questions, or conflicting instructions from multiple leaders. Improvements can include establishing a single source of truth for the incident status, defining update rhythms, and using clear statements of known facts, current hypotheses, and current actions. Communication improvements also include training responders to describe risk and impact plainly without overselling certainty. When communication improves, the whole response becomes smoother because decisions happen faster and fewer people work at cross purposes. For lessons learned to strengthen every phase, you must turn lessons into actions, and actions must be prioritized and owned. A lesson without an owner is just an observation, and an observation without follow-through will be forgotten the moment the next emergency arrives. A useful approach is to translate each major lesson into a specific change, such as improving a monitoring gap, clarifying an escalation path, or updating a recovery procedure, then assign it to the person or team responsible for that area. You also decide what success looks like, which could be measurable, like improved detection time, or practical, like a documented and practiced rebuild process. Prioritization matters because organizations cannot fix everything at once, so you choose changes that reduce the most risk or remove the biggest recurring friction. You also set reasonable checkpoints to verify progress, because improvement work can fade when daily tasks take over. When lessons become owned actions with defined outcomes, closing the loop becomes real, and the incident produces lasting value. Another important part of closing the loop is capturing the incident story in a way that is accurate, understandable, and useful for future responders. This is not about writing a dramatic narrative, because the goal is operational memory that helps the next team move faster. A good incident story includes the timeline, the confirmed root cause as best as it is known, the scope and impact, and the key decisions that shaped containment and recovery. It also includes what worked well, because you want to preserve strengths, not only fix weaknesses. For beginners, it is helpful to realize that this documentation is not just for leadership, because it also feeds training and preparation. When new responders join the team, past incidents are one of the best ways to show how the environment behaves and what pitfalls to avoid. A well-captured incident story becomes a reference that improves future hypotheses, accelerates scoping, and clarifies what evidence is most valuable. In that way, documentation itself becomes a control that strengthens IR over time. In closing the loop with lessons learned is how you make incident response, IR, a cycle of improvement rather than a series of isolated emergencies. When you approach lessons learned with a system-focused mindset, collect evidence-driven inputs, and map lessons to IR phases, you create clarity about what needs to change and why. When you convert lessons into prioritized actions with owners, you ensure the learning becomes real improvements in preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and communication. The end result is not only fewer incidents, but also better outcomes when incidents do happen, because the organization responds with more speed, more confidence, and less disruption. This is what it means to strengthen every phase, because the incident becomes a teacher and the organization becomes better at listening to what the incident revealed. When you consistently close the loop this way, you turn response work into a long-term advantage rather than a recurring source of pain.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.